Welcome to Scratch tutorial lesson number 7. We still have one big topic ahead of us, controls, but before we get to them in the next lesson, let's first address here another important topic, variables and lists. Variables store some information in them so that we can use and edit and reuse them in different parts of our projects. You may say, wait, isn't that the same as what values are, which we covered in lesson number 6? And you will be right. However, values are made available to us by Scratch, and we have no decision on which values are there to be used. So for instance, in this motion group, if you remember, the only values we have are the X and Y position and the direction. This was predetermined for us, and these are the only ones that we can use. Now, when we decide that we need to store some information, a number, a text, or a boolean, we need to create a variable to store it. This is pretty much the only difference between variables and values. And you will see that sometimes even the values are called conveniently variables, which is in essence correct. So if we click on the variables group, there is already a default variable, my variable, and it can be used as is. If you prefer, you can change its name right here, right click and rename the variable. And available actions for it are to set a value, increase or decrease by an increment. So if you decrease, this is going to be negative, right? And then to show and to hide it. You can also create your own variable if you click on make a variable here, and then you're asked to make two decisions. The first one is to assign a name for a variable. We're going to call ours account, and then to decide whether this variable is going to be available for all sprites, so in a sense it's going to be a global variable, or if it's going to be available only for the active sprite, so in that sense it would be a local variable. This one we're going to be keeping as global, available for all sprites, right? The first thing you notice right away that by default this variable becomes displayed in the top left corner of the stage. This is because this box is automatically checked, so we can easily remove it from the stage if we don't want it to be shown there, or show it if we prefer to have. So count typically would be displayed, right, if we count something along the action. All right, so to quickly demonstrate the use of this variable count, right, what we're gonna do, we're gonna have our cat Skratchko see a dog and try to call dog. So we need to add a sprite for dog, and let's say it's right here. So what is gonna happen when we click on the green flag, right? That's gonna typical event that we use. Skratchko is gonna call dog, so it's gonna go here and say, call it by say, hey buddy. And let's say I make it a short call, just 0.5 seconds, right? But then the dog needs to know that the cat is calling him, right? So remember how the sprites communicate among themselves. In the events, they use broadcasting and receiving messages. So the cat is calling, the cat is going to broadcast the message to a dog, and the dog is going to act on that call, on that message. So the dog is going to act when it receives this message. So when the dog receives the message, it's going just to be playful and not respond to it, but it will count how many times the cat called him, right? So what is going to happen, we're going to use this counter, which is initialized at 0, right? And then we're going to increase it by 1 when we receive a message because we know that the cat called, right? So we're going to go to our variables and we're going to change the count, change this our variable by 1, which means we're going to add 1, increment it by 1 because of this call. And then since dog is being playful. It's not really saying anything, but let's make a dog kind of think about, okay, I've been called this many times, right? So, and we can also make him think about this for 0.5 seconds, right? So what is the number that we want to put here? It's exactly this count, right? So we're going to go to our variable and pick up this variable count, and this is what the dog is going to be thinking about. So how many times he was called, right? So let's see how it works, right? We click on this flag once. Hey buddy, 1. Hey buddy, 2 times. Hey buddy, 3 times, and you get the idea how many times, right? Now, let's say we also want to be able to reset the count so that this activity can start from the beginning. And we had a reset in some other examples in previous lessons for a different purpose though. So you remember we need to go and find a sprite that we can use as a button, right, for a reset. We used this one before. Let's use this one now just to have something a little bit different. We can decrease this size, seems quite large. So let's say, okay, this is maybe okay. And then if you remember before, we had the text on our elongated button before, but right now we're going to put a text for a reset within the backdrop. So just to show different options. So we go to backdrop, we use text, right? And we're going to insert the text for the reset right here, right? And as we do that, it appears on the stage, and we can move it a little bit to try position it better, but it's probably easier to do this positioning on the stage itself and move this button, right? So what do we want to do? When this sprite is clicked, we want to reset this counting, right? So our event that's going to trigger action here is when the sprite is clicked, right? So when the sprite is clicked, we want to reset the count. We go to our variable, and we're going to reset it by setting the count back to 0, right? So very simple, but just demonstrates the thing. So if we click here on the button, it resets the count 0. If we click on the flag, it restarts counting, right? So this concludes this example for the variable. And before we go any further, we won't need the reset button, we won't need the dog anymore, and let's also delete this text reset, because we don't need that one either anymore. So, and we're gonna also delete the count variable altogether. We don't need that either. And let's, just for the sake of it, position our sprite to 0. And we can also remove these. We're probably gonna need a flag, right? So we can stay here. Now, you see that within this variables group, there is also an option to make a list, which means that a list also stores variables. Sometimes we handle multiple variables, and it is convenient to keep them together in an organized list or an array, where each variable has its position in a column. So, having a list means that besides knowing the variables in the list, we also know their positions in such a column. When we click here on Make a List, we face the same decisions that we faced for the variable, right? We need to assign a name, so let's just call it simply a list. And also we need to decide, is it global or local? It doesn't really matter right now, let's just keep it global. So right here we see, we notice several differences. First, just as variable, the list is automatically displayed on the stage. See, this would be the elements. We see that it's initialized as an empty list, so there are no variables in the list when it initializes. And also at the bottom we see that it also tells us what is the length, how many variables there are in the list. Right now it's 0. There are no variables. As a variable, we can uncheck and check to display or not the list on the stage, depending on our preference. But also notice underneath what happened, right? We got a full array of blocks that are specifically related to lists. So all sorts of manipulations within these lists can be also now done programmatically once we introduce a list in our project, right? So let's see, for instance, what can we do, how we create this list, for instance, right? We can create a list right here on the stage. You see, by clicking this plus button here, we can simply add element of a list. We can enter a number. We can enter some word, right? We can add one more. Say we can make this Boolean, but pay attention that this is not truly Boolean. This is just a text that we wrote, and we know that this is a Boolean, but this is not recognized as a Boolean just by writing true or false, right? And besides populating a list right here, we can also add an element to a list here, right? So we can add 45, whatever it's going to be next in line when we click on the flag. So we added element number 4. We can delete elements from the list or variables from the list. We can insert element or variable at a particular position in the list, or replace variable, whatever there was, with something else. So let's see what happens if we try to replace, for instance, variable at position number 5. Notice we don't have position number 5. So if we try to replace this, we can click it right here to test, right? Nothing happens. It doesn't happen simply because there's nothing in that position. But if we change this to 4, right, and now try, number 45 is now replaced by a thing. So we can also see what else is available here. We can find what is the number in particular list. So let's say we're asking ourselves, what is in the position 3 in this list, right? So these are the indices 1, 2, 3, 4 that are paired with particular values in the position 1, position 2, 3, and 4. So if we're asking which item is at position 3 of the list, we would get the answer true, right? So let's test it. Click true, right? That is in the position 3. Okay. And obviously, right, we can find the length of the list, which is very important. We can ask whether list contains a certain variable, but notice the shape, hexagonal shape. Remember what we talked about before. It implies that this is a Boolean, right? So when we ask a question, does this list contain this variable? The answer is going to be only yes or no. So this qualifies it for a Boolean because it can be only yes, true, or no, false, right? And then we can also show and hide lists. So this is the equivalent of checking and unchecking that box that we showed at the beginning. Okay, so let's do something just a little bit more to demonstrate this. For instance, let's first delete the current list. Okay, and then let's add something that would look like information that is stored for the password protected login, right? So let's say in the first item in the list, in the first variable, there would be somebody's name, right? So we're going to add the name, then we're going to add the last name. Okay, so then is the last name in the second position. The third position, it would be say email, right? So joe@mail.com, right? So, and then we add this at the third position. Then the fourth position would be, say, username. So let's say his username is going to be Joe Smith. Oops. Smith. Well, issues in typing looks like. So we're adding username in the position 4, and at position 5 we're going to add the password. So Joe doesn't care too much about password security, and he has only 123 as a password, right? So this is our list that contains all the information about a user, right, of a password protected content. So we're going to ask our cat, our Skratchko, to tell us what is this user's email address, but Skratchko doesn't know the position, exact index of email address in this list. Only thing that Skratchko knows is that it's a third position from the back. So we tell him, okay, it's the third position of the back where you can find the email address. Go find the email address and tell us what that is. Okay, so how is Skratchko going to do that? So first of all, it's supposed to tell us, right, what is the address. So we're going to need this from the looks to say that. Then we want to combine different words, right? Now remember, in the operators, we had this combination where we would combine words, right? So let's say that he would start by saying the email address is, okay? And then we need to figure out what that truly is. So how are we going to find the address? Let's think about this. We know it's the third one from the back, so we need to know first how many variables are there in this list. How are we going to find how many variables are there? You remember in the variables there is an option to look for the length of the list, right? So we're going to need the length of the list. Then what we need to do, we need to find the length and subtract 2, right, to get to the third from the back. So we need the subtraction. So we go back to the operators as well. We're going to say, all right, we need to go find the length and then subtract 2 from the length, right? And then this is the index, this is the position of the email address. So we need to go with this index into our list and pick up a variable that corresponds to this position, right? So then we go to variables and we say, okay, where is the point where we need to find item at this particular position, right? Which is right here. So the position is here. We're going to bring it right there. This is going to be our item that we want to state after the first statement the email address is. So we join this to the first statement, and then we're going to basically plug all this into the statement that Skratchko is going to tell us. So this is how we find this email address. So what is left here at the very end is to test and make sure that this works, right? So when we click the flag, the Skratchko is supposed to tell us this email address. Okay, so the email address is joe@mail.com. All right, so this concludes our lesson about variables and lists.